Hi, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of Last Week This Morning. Mark and I have decided to go live and talk about some of what happened over the weekend, and also then we're going to talk about what happened last week. So let's start, Markham. There's been a bit of confusion around this MoU. Has there been an MoU signed? What is happening around this pipeline MoU between Carney and Smith?
I don't know about you, MC, but I'm very confused.
Me too.
And it's not a question of whether the MOU is signed or unsigned. It's why we need an MOU in the first place. So for viewers, let's back up a little bit. So Danielle Smith and the Alberta oil industry have wanted a pipeline to Prince Rupert or Kitimat on the west coast of British Columbia for years, right? So I mean, this has been just a drumbeat out of Alberta now for a long time. And so the Carney government, in response to Trump's tariffs and trade threats and annexation threats, is now trying to pivot the economy away from further integration with the U.S. out to Asia and Europe. So the idea of building a pipeline to the West Coast is that more of Alberta's heavy sour crude could be shipped to Asian refineries and European refineries. Okay. There is no proponent. This is a big problem. The pipeline companies have, and the two big ones in Canada are Enbridge and TC Energy, or Southbow actually is the new name for TC Energy's oil pipeline. This gets complicated. You don't even know who the players are. You got to clarify that. But so anyway, they have said no. We're not interested. We're going to deploy our capital in the United States, where they're building all sorts of gas pipelines and new pipelines, and there's lots of opportunity. And I get it. I mean, if I was the pipeline companies, that's what I would do. That's the more rational use of their capital. Okay, so the Alberta government has stepped forward and said, we now have a coalition where TC, Southbow, and Enbridge and Trans Mountain Corporation, which is actually a federal Crown Corporation that runs Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline, are technical advisors, and the Alberta government will be the proponent. So presumably, we don't know what this structure is going to look like, but Smith has said, we will put a formal proposal into the federal government to become a project of national interest in March. Okay. So I think most rational people looked at that and went, oh, okay, well, it's off the table then. We'll see what happens in March and what they come up with, and it won't be an issue. Well, suddenly now we discovered a couple of weeks ago that Prime Minister Mark Carney and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith and their teams have been negotiating a memorandum of understanding. Well, an MOU is non-binding. It's a statement of intent. The two
Right.
parties, why do those two parties need a statement of intent? They've been telling us their intent for months in the media and in
Right.
their public comments. And since it's non-binding, I just don't understand what the point is. And I'm sure, if okay, so that's where we're at now. On Saturday,
Yeah.
Rick Bell from the Calgary Herald reported that they had actually signed the MOU, but it would be announced later this week. So it was kind of a little taste. And in his column, he didn't say much. I mean, it was a whole 800 words of bump to just say they signed the MOU. So that's really what we know, which is not a big advance on or a big improvement on what we knew already, but apparently this thing is coming. So between now and then, what we're going to be speculating is, why the hell do we need one? And there's a battle brewing already because Smith has been in the media and for years now, but particularly in 2025, on and on and on about this pipeline. Right. She's almost said that if they
Yeah.
don't have it, it'll be a national crisis, a constitutional crisis. She's going to make it a constitutional crisis. Okay. Well, over the last month or so, BC Premier David Eby has been shooting back. And he's been saying, look, there's no project here. There's no proponent. There's nothing. So it's the pipeline to nowhere. Why are we talking about this? And then, of course, that every every proxy and troll and Alberta politician then lit their hair on fire and oh my God, they're criticizing EB. So here's the problem. There, Carney is talking up a pipeline. He's negotiating an MoU with Smith. Or now apparently he signed it, and all he's doing is by building this relationship with Alberta, but apparently excluding BC, is he stoking the fires of the fight between BC and Alberta. Like
Yes.
you would think that given the fact that we're trying to have a united Canada, Team Canada approach to Trump, we're trying to rebuild this, re-engineer our economy and orient it towards Europe and Asia in real time. I mean, there's a lot of urgency. You would think that keeping the relationship between two of the biggest provinces in Canada on good terms, working out a compromise, some sort of middle ground. Instead, what Carney is essentially doing is setting the two of them at each other's throats. And it really is counterproductive. And I just don't understand why there's this insistence on an MoU and all this rah, 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 sis boom bah around the pipeline from Carney and his energy minister, Tim Hodgson, and other
Yes.
ministers. It makes no sense to me. And the only thing I can think of, MC, is that Carney, for reasons that we can discuss later if you want, really wants the pipeline, and he will somehow mollify and placate EB with billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars of projects, funding, subsidies, whatever it's going to be. I don't see any other rational resolution to this conflict, political conflict.
Well, we've got a comment here from Reboot Alberta who's saying an MOU is a political symbolism to show political progress and set up the ground rules to continue negotiations. Of course, that, we do understand a bit of that, but that is, part of what the Majors Project Office is for. So, I mean, I understand. Okay, so they've put together their intent. They have an MOU. Now, next step, but now we have the Major Projects Office. So like they're not going to go straight into negotiations. It has to be deemed a project that the Major Projects Office is going to take on. Am I correct about that?
Well, they need a proposal.
Right.
And once they put forward the proposal, assuming the Alberta government is the proponent, like Smith said it would be, then cabinet takes a look at it and designates it as a project of national interest, which then it refers it to the Major Projects Office run by Don Farrell, and then they work on fast tracking that proposal through environmental approvals and Aboriginal consultation and so on. So
Right.
given that we've already had this major raucous conversation about a pipeline now for years and certainly months in 2025, given Carney's friendly signals towards it, where is the need for symbolism here? We got all the symbolism we need, and the
Yes.
process, the process for how it's supposed to proceed, which is, proponent, proposal, consideration by cabinet, referral to the major project. That's all set out clearly. I don't see any value whatsoever in symbolism. All it does is keep it in front of the public, keep it in front of the media, and start a political war between Alberta and British Columbia. It's counterproductive. I don't see the value of it, and I see lots of damage being done by the. I think that the Prime Minister and his Energy Minister Tim Hodgson are handling they're mishandling this situation.
Well, we've got Dale 2 and B224 who's just saying, thanks, Markham, for tackling this pipeline issue. By the way, he just posted a video explaining the advantages of electrification and Canada's uncertainty in the energy future. So please, let's share that video with us in the comments, and Markham and I will take a look, of course. We also have Jamie Halt. I'm not sure if that's pronounced correctly, but he's saying that Carney's trying his hardest to get Smith reelected. So that's an interesting point of view. Um, and
Uh,
just referring back to, Ralph Klein and Kretchen played this game for years, he said. So I mean, my big question still remains, what is the business case for a new pipeline in 2025? I mean, I obviously the MOU is not going to address that issue, but we still haven't seen either party come out and, do the math for us or tell us exactly how this is going to benefit taxpayers, who I'm assuming are going to be flipping the bill for this.
So I have been poking around in Ottawa. We have sources there, obviously, in various departments and people who are connected to the government in one way or another, or they're part of the political scene in Ottawa, and they hear the gossip and know people in the know. And the word is that in the federal government, it is drill, baby, drill. That's the nobody wants to hear any alternatives to pipelines.
Right.
I had a conversation, had a coffee with a proponent of a bitumen beyond combustion type project last week, and they said that Smith, the Alberta government, absolutely doesn't want to hear what they have to say. The federal government doesn't want to have anything to do with them because all they are fixated on is the pipeline and further expansion of the oil sands, and everything else is off the table. So when I hear story after story after story like that, and how do like I can square that with Tim Hodgson and Danielle Smith, right? Tim Hodgson came out of the Goldman Sachs. He was the CEO there and then he joined Carney at the Bank of Canada around 2003, 2004, something like that. He was like a second banana to Carney there. Tim Hodgson has the reputation as a deal maker in the natural resource sector. He sat on oil and gas boards. He has put together deals, to finance projects. And all you have to do is listen to him. I mean, he's a very aggressive guy who would be just right at home on Wall Street as he is on Bay Street. And so that's who our energy minister is. He is not Mark Carney. Mark Carney has a reputation in climate finance. He wrote his book Values in 2021, and so I did a video not that long ago, said, bait and switch. I voted for Values Carney and got Goldman Sachs Carney.
Yeah.
And the point is, which Carney is at the helm here, and our viewers who by and large really like Carney, and because they see him as the bulwark against Trump, and guy's smart and he can lead the country. He's got a PhD in economics. But I think what we've got here, folks, let's just put the cards on the table. We've got Goldman Sachs Carney, who is absolutely committed to expanding the oil and gas sector. Basically, would be the oil sands and LNG. That's what he's doing, and he wants to attract. They're very capital intensive industries, so they'll bring a lot of capital into the country. They'll generate a lot of royalties and a lot of tax revenue, some of it which will go to the federal government to help pay for the big projects that Carney wants to get off the ground. That's what's going on here. I think we can the idea of climate Carney, limiting fossil fuels or phasing out fossil fuels. That guy is off. He's not in the building.
Yeah.
It's
Well, I
Goldman.
mean,
We got Goldman Sachs Carney.
we got a comment here just saying, I don't know what Carney is thinking. Maybe he's just trying to keep everyone happy. Maybe that's true. I mean, he seems to be going along with what Markham and I have talked about a lot, which is incumbents. We're just going along with what has always been talked about in Canada. No one is trying to start something new here. And I
Can
guess
we say?
that also,
I want to say something. I'm
yeah,
sorry to
yeah,
interrupt. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we do know what Mark Carney's thinking because he keeps telling us what he's thinking. He
yeah,
holds press conferences and he tells us exactly what he's thinking about these things. So let's stop pretending that he's playing 4D chess and Danielle Smith is playing checkers, and somehow there's this grand strategy that's only going on in Carney's head, and he's moving people around the chessboard,
yeah,
and we'll get to some sort of no. That's not what's happening. Mark Carney has said exactly what he wants. Take him at his word. How many times do we hear, you know, people will tell you who they are? Mark
yeah,
Carney is telling us what he's doing. And we don't want to believe it because, our viewership is not friendly to pipelines and further expansion of the oil sands with a very good reason, right?
right.
And so we don't want to believe that Mark Carney has suddenly become a fossil fuel supporter and promoter But that's exactly what he's doing, and it's exactly what he's telling it. So let's stop being children here. He
Yeah,
is
well, I mean, exactly. He's showing us what he wants to do. And so we need to take him at his word at the moment. I don't think that there is a bigger scheme. I mean, many of our viewers talk about this 4D chess, Markham, and we've heard it many times.
uh,
But it's hard to see. I mean, unless the strategy is buried so deep that he's not sharing it with anyone. Sorry, I've got a little person climbing on me
that's not a problem. Yeah,
here.
you brought up the issue of a business case, and the issue
Yep.
here is, will there be customers in Asia and Europe for Alberta's heavy crude? Will there be customers
Yes.
for LNG in Asia and Europe over time? Bring Lorges up here if you want.
Here she is. She's having a
There
hard
she
time.
is. Hello,
Oh, she's
sweetheart.
cranky.
Okay.
Oh, she's cranky. But yeah, you are right. I mean, we've got a lot of comments coming in here. You know, then his word is, this is what he wants. He wants to build us a pipeline. He wants to expand. Um, and yeah, exactly. But Markham and I have been asking for a long time is, okay, so where's the math? What's the business case? What does this mean for Canada? And also, I think, what does this mean for the narrative in Canada around this energy transition that's coming?
So here's an irony here, and to give Carney credit, because and when I always have to give this qualification. We like Carney. If there's anybody who is going to lead Canada in the right direction, he's the dude, right? He's got all the qualifications and all of the expertise and knowledge that is required to do this. Our big problem is that he's putting too much emphasis on oil and gas going forward and not enough on electrification and building out the national power grid. Now, having said all of that, it is true that in budget 2025, there is the climate competitiveness strategy, which upon we've dived into it in some videos on our YouTube channel, which you can go and have a look. There were some interviews with Fernando Mello from the Canadian Renewable Energy Association, and we went into depth in some of the strategy, and it's very good. It's very good. I mean, there's a lot of projects in there, a lot of policy and industrial policy and regulations, around building out the power grid, building clean energy manufacturing plants like batteries and EVs and that sort of thing. So it's here. What we have here, in my opinion, is a problem of balance. The right now the clean energy part of the equation is muted. We're not talking about it. The government isn't doing much about it. Maybe it is behind the scenes, but nobody's telling us, so we have to assume that they aren't. And it's all about oil and gas and pipelines and LNG and so on. And we believe here at Energy Media, the evidence says that there will not be enough market demand after 2030 for more LNG plants. There will not that heavy crude oil demand will fall after 2030, and there will not be enough to support a million barrel pipeline. And in fact, I'm publishing a Substack essay today, which will set out what we think is a third way. It says Carney's not wrong. Carney is wrong. Pierre Poilievre, the CPC leader, is wrong about the energy future. There is a third way. There's a third way, and you can read about it. All of the suggestions around geothermal and bitumen beyond combustion and optimizing existing infrastructure and crude to chemicals, all sorts of stuff that that Canada could do that would be less risk, higher value, but you have to think outside the box. And the oil and gas industry, as I have said over and over again, does not think outside the box. It thinks very well inside the box, but it's risk averse and it doesn't think outside the box. And we need outside the box thinking. And by God, that's what we elected Carney for. Not to give us more of the same, to give
Yeah.
us different.
Well, and Maria's bringing up a good point here. Carney brought up revitalizing the Keystone pipeline from Alberta down to the States. Do you not think that he might be talking about that? But again, we're not sure. We haven't seen the MoU.
Well, no. And why would you bring up a pipeline that nobody wants to build? Uh, Um, I mean, the proponent for Keystone said it's done. We're not interested because all of the pipe that we had bought and the infrastructure we had built has now either rotted or been sold. All of the easements that we negotiated for the pipeline have lapsed. On and on and on. And they've said, we have no interest in it whatsoever. So why, as the prime minister, would you go down to Donald Trump and say, hey, would you like to do the Keystone XL? The proponent doesn't want to do it. They have no interest in doing it. But hey, let's talk about it in public, so why? What is the point behind that? And 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 here's the irony. There is there is demand in the US Gulf Coast right now for more Canadian heavy sour crude that comes out of the oil sands. Why do you think Enbridge said we're going to add another 400,000 barrels of shipping capacity over the next 2 or 3 years by optimizing our existing pipes? Because there is demand in Houston. There absolutely is. There just isn't enough for a Keystone XL pipeline. And why are we not optimizing what we have instead of insisting on building more and more and more that could become stranded assets? I think the strategic approach here is wrong.
Yeah, well, and card crazed is just bringing up another point, which we talked about, is just will this be cleaner? Like, is there a strategic um, advantage to having a cleaner product available on the market?
Well, okay, so here's a really good point. I mean, that's a great question. Okay, so let's say that as we advocate, is you pivoted the Alberta oil sands from producing feedstock for refineries, where no one cares about the emissions intensity of the barrel unless you're selling to California, which is a grist for another conversation. But for the most part in the United States, nobody cares about the emissions intensity. Now you pivot to making feedstock for advanced materials manufacturing like asphalt binder and carbon fiber. Now you're creating a material, not a fuel. And in the material market, emissions intensity of your supply chain matters a lot, especially if you're selling into places like Europe, which now has a carbon border adjustment mechanism, and China, which will soon have something similar. So yes, I mean, not only are you not burning that barrel of heavy crude, you're making something with it instead, but also now there's market pressure on the producers to reduce their upstream emissions, which are extremely high, an average of 66 kilograms of CO2e per barrel compared to the global average of 27. Okay. So Alberta, I don't care what Energy Minister Brian Jean says, that the oil sands crude, heavy crude is dirty. It just is. That's what the data says. I've got it in a spreadsheet on my computer if you want to see it. It's the data is irrefutable. Okay. So if you switch to materials, you don't burn it. You now have pressure to clean up the emissions from upstream. I mean, so yes, there is a cleaner strategy here. There's a strategy that results in fewer emissions, far fewer emissions if we pursue that than more of the status quo.
Well, and I mean, that's a good point. I mean, we don't know, right now it looks like there's not going to be customers in Asia. We've talked a lot about this. We don't know if there's going to be some type of market advantage. I think the point is we still don't have a business case for this pipeline, and we just keep talking about building another pipeline, and with our blinders on, not even looking at other possibilities for the Canadian economy. Now, I want to
Can I,
move on
can
to
I,
some other
can,
stories, but yeah, go ahead.
I just let me finish it because I've spent a lot of time with this lately, and I'm getting a lot of feedback from people in Alberta who are saying, without any evidence, without any data, without any reference to actual modeling, energy demand modeling, they're saying, oh yeah, well, if demand in China goes down, then that'll be light crude. Right, that'll be crude that's used to make gasoline, for example. But the Alberta's heavy crude, which goes into petrochemicals, which goes into distillates, that makes jet fuel, that kind of. Oh, that demand will stay, and somehow, even if global demand for oil falls significantly, like down by half to the IEA's APS scenario modeling, that's okay. Alberta will be all right. What a fantasy. How, that is not a data-based, evidence-based argument. All that is a fantasy that comforts you so that you can sleep at night and not worry about your provincial economy blowing up. Uh, but that fantasy is not just held by individuals. It goes right up the chain to the CEOs of oil companies. And it's not based on any evidence. And if it is based on evidence, like if they've got some great computer model in the basement of Cenovus or Suncor, and they have information that the rest of the world doesn't have, Canadian Energy Regulator, for example, which on and on, share it with us.
Yeah,
Because
we'd love to see it.
we, the taxpayer, are already coughing up $10 billion to subsidize carbon capture and storage in the oil sands. We're going to wind up subsidizing a lot of this other infrastructure. So if I'm paying the bill, or a small part of the bill, then I need to know. I want to see the business case.
Yeah.
You don't get to ask for my money and then pat me on the head and just say, "Don't worry about it. We got it." No, 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 no. We've done that
Well,
in the
or leave the
past. And
bill for
all,
your grandchildren to pay for as well. That's part of it. I mean, we don't actually know what we're getting ourselves into. I mean, I mean, the comments are blowing up here, Markham. It's great to see so many people joining us for this morning show. We're happy to be able to be part of your morning, especially on Monday. So thanks everyone, and thanks for all the comments. Uh, yes,
but you want to move on. Let's move on.
well, let's
Yep.
yeah, let's move on. Ask your questions below. Uh, you know, Neolithic Transit Revolution is chiming in a lot here. He's one of our biggest fans, so thanks for joining us. He says that you often point to bitumen beyond combustion on the basis of superiority, for superior quality to manufacturing actually. And so, yeah, I mean, what we're trying to talk about here is what else can we do if we're not building pipelines? And that's what Mark and I have been trying to talk about is, what other opportunities are there for the Canadian
Well,
economy?
here's an irony. Here's the irony. Let's just assume my argument for a moment that we pivot all, like right now, the oil sands makes about 3.3 million barrels a day, and about
Right.
1 million barrels or so is upgraded into synthetic crude oil. So that's not raw bitumen anymore. You've maybe got about 2 million barrels a day of raw bitumen that you could use for bitumen beyond combustion. And out of that, you don't get the whole barrel. You get, like 30, 40, 50% of the barrel. That is the bottom of the barrel, the asphaltenes. Okay. So let's just assume that we pivoted all the way over to bitumen beyond combustion over a period of 10 or 15 years. So if we're right and the IEA's APS scenario comes true, and global demand for oil falls by half, and prices fall off a cliff, and suddenly, Saudi and the Iraqis are pushing us out of Asian markets, out of petrochemical markets and so on. The worst case scenario, I by building your own domestic market for heavy crude that goes into crude to chemicals, asphalt binder, carbon fiber, graphite, and on and on. I'm actually arguing to set up the oil sands for 100 years of prosperity, well into 2020, the 22nd century.
Yeah.
And it's the supporters of the status quo that say, "Oh my God, Hislop, you hate the oil sands." No, dudes, if you like the industry that much, you would be arguing to set it
To
up on
keep
a
it.
more stable, sustainable basis, which is
Yeah.
not providing feedstock for fuels. It's feedstock for materials. That's the future.
Yeah.
But we're in Canada, we're so enamored of incumbents and the status quo. Don't frickin' change. It's too risky. We're Canadians. We don't like risk. Bugger off. We're going to do things the way we've always done them. And it's really getting under my skin because now we've got it from the prime minister to the energy minister to the premier to everybody has got this thing about you can't change the status quo, despite the fact that the global energy transition is destroying the status quo. This
Yeah.
makes no sense. Will somebody else please stand up and agree with us because the data supports our argument?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I've had enough. I've
Well, I
ranted
mean, I
enough
think this
now.
is a perfect segue actually to talking about AI data centers because that has been, something that Smith started talking about. Um, you know, and so where are we at with data centers in Alberta? Talk to us about that.
This is so
Where are
Danielle
we or
Smith.
where are we not?
All right, this is so Danielle Smith. So first of all, in 2024, she absolutely cut the knees out of the renewable energy industry in Alberta, despite the fact that it had led for years in the addition of wind and solar generating capacity. So she cuts the knees out of it. And then in 2025, she says, "Oh my God, we found religion. We're going to go and we're going to attract AI data centers because AI data centers are exploding everywhere." There's an article in my inbox that I haven't got a chance to read today about how in the PJM uh, uh, RTO in the United States, which is kind of up in the northeast corner, um, data centers are driving demand bananas, and it's driving consumer prices up. It's becoming a crisis, right? So
Yeah.
Smith wants on the bandwagon. And so she talks this up and everybody believes her. And so they get like 13, 14 gigawatts of new demand load from data centers. And then it turns out, oops, we can't do that. We can only do 1.2 gigawatts, like 10% of what she promised. So we're calling them bragawatts, right? And this is the thing. For Christ's sake, can we stop bragging and living in this fantasy world where everything is driven by narrative and get back to doing evidence-based stuff? So, what Smith does is she got all these, private investors excited and they all came into the table and said, "Yeah, we'll build data centers and, so on and so forth." And then, the Alberta Electric System Operator had to say, "Don't have the power and we're not going to have it for a while. So we're only going to allow two projects." Is that a rational way to run the electric industry in Alberta? Of course it's not.
No.
Of course it's not. We're running on hype, and running on hype never works out in the long run. So stop the hype. That was the
Yeah,
point
well,
of the essay.
Ian's calling it scamawatts here in the comments. I think that's another great name. I
Bragawatt,
mean,
scabawatt. Yeah, exactly.
this is another example where we are seeing, um, you know, S Smith lead with ideology and instead of leading with data. So here we go again.
Yes. And I can't tell. Look, I've been around Danielle Smith enough over the years, and I pay attention to what she does and what she says, and she is not a data evidence based person. She is all about ideology. Remember, just after she became a premier in 2022, I think it was Andrew Coyne wrote from the Globe and Mail wrote a column about how she's like a blue jay. She picks up shiny objects, whatever ideas, whoever's talked to her last, she's like Donald Trump. Whatever shiny idea popped up in front of Trump's face, that's what he'd grab on and he'd make a big announcement about it. And Smith is kind of like that. And I have to say, I mean, dear God in heaven, we're now like 3.5 years into Smith as premier, and Alberta is a tire fire. It's a tire fire surrounded by dumpster fires, fed by a you know health, education, energy, the power sector, on and on and on and on and on it goes, and it just clearly this has to be. I thought Jason Kenney's government, the other UCP government, was the most incompetent in the history of Canada. But Smith is clearly the most incompetent premier. And the thing that changes, or thing that disguises her incompetence, is her ability to sell. She makes batshit crazy sound sane.
Yeah.
That's her superpower. She'll
She's very
stand
good
up
with
and
words.
very good. She's a great communicator.
Yeah.
But if you look at the evidence and the data behind what she says, she's almost always wrong. She's very seldom right. And in Canada, like in Alberta, name me one journalist. I mean, aside from people like Jeremy Appel and other sort of further left journalists, independent
Yeah.
journalists, there are a couple of them out there. But name me one person, one journalist who goes beyond, like Rick Bell at the Herald is a stenographer. Whatever Smith says, he just writes it out and champions her ideas. And then Don Braid, the old warhorse at the Herald, that should have been put out the pasture 20 years ago, he does the same thing. And then there's Chris Varco at the Herald, who is his job is the energy beat. So in Alberta, that means you talk nice about oil and gas. You never criticize the premier or the companies. That's the way it is. So there is literally no critical analysis of her energy policy in the public forum.
Yeah.
Aside
Yeah.
from Energy Media, I don't know anybody who regularly takes her to task based on the data, who deconstructs the things she says and proves them to be BS.
Well, you're going to love this comment, Markham. There's a Make America Great Again watts. So we've got megawatts with all capitals. I think that one's
Megawatts.
great.
I like that.
Um,
I like that.
Now, one other thing I wanted to talk about this week was the evangelical link to libertarian Alberta. And I mean, I'm switching topics here again, but I'd love to
For
hear you
sure.
talk about this. You put out a kind of a talk to the camera video over the weekend, and yeah, I was just hoping you could expand on those ideas a little.
I wrote a couple of Substack essays where I explored the idea of what Professor Trish Roberts Miller, recently retired from the University of Texas at Austin, she wrote about authoritarian libertarianism in American politics. There's a 400-year history of it. It pops up all the time. It's popped up again with Donald Trump. It popped up in the 1950s with Joseph McCarthy. It's been around on and on. It goes back to the colonial time history in the United States. And the best way to understand it, from my point of view, is Henry Ford. Henry Ford said, you can have your car in any color you wanted as long as it's black. And the authoritarian libertarians say you can have as much freedom as you want as long as we agree with it. And if we don't agree with it, we will then use the power of the state to punish you or to rein you in. So you see this in the anti-vax movement. RFK. You see that all over again. And so I argue that Danielle Smith is very clearly not a libertarian in the classical sense. She is an authoritarian libertarian. The kind that will use the notwithstanding clause to put to order 51,000 striking teachers back to work. Use the power of the state to compel people to behave the way that she wants them to behave. And so evangelical Christianity plays a big role in that. And so I used my own personal experiences. During the 80s when I was going to university living in Saskatoon, I attended a lot of evangelical churches, and I was always the round peg in the square hole, right? I never quite fit but I was in those churches, and my peer group, who were parents in their 20s and 30s at that time, um, I saw the way they behaved, and I saw the influence of the American televangelists, the James Dobson focus on the family and moral majority and Oral Roberts and Jimmy Swaggart and Jim Baker and a whole lot. I saw how they were radicalizing my peer group. And and now the ideas that they were talking about 40 years ago, we're now seeing as underpinning the authoritarian libertarianism politics in the US and Trump's MAGA movement. And there are absolutely direct lines between the MAGA movement and Alberta politics. Because when I lived in Calgary from 2000 to 2010, I met a lot of people who were evangelical Christians and social conservatives and active politically. And they would tell me things like, "Oh yeah, there's this leadership institute in in Virginia, that's coming up, and every year they come up and they train us in Republican ideals and in campaign strategies and so on. And then through the oil and gas industry, people are connected to Texas and their politics, and we don't have to. I mean, I interviewed Professor Dwayne Bratt from Mount Royal University, political scientist, who was talking about, like Minister Devin Dreeshen from in Smith's government, who, volunteered on Trump's campaigns and has very, very tight connections with. That's one example. That's one cabinet minister, one person in her caucus, and there's dozens more. So the links between the MAGA movement in the United States and what's going on with the United Conservative Party in Alberta is very, very tight. And I'm not saying that, one is directing the other. I'm saying that there is the push-pull, and you can see it in Smith's policies, you can see it in her politics, you can see it in what's going on the ground out in rural Alberta and other places. And so it was part of. Here's my personal experience and insights into what's going on, and also and then I sketched out the context, again of Trish Roberts Miller and the framework around evangelical authoritarian libertarianism, and it's a framework within which to understand what's going on, and then plug in evangelical Christianity, which is very hierarchical, very apocalyptic, I mean, it clarifies a lot of things about why people are doing what they're doing, why Smith is doing what she's doing.
Yeah, and I think I mean there's been a lot of comments here, debating about who's looked at and who hasn't looked at the data, and yeah, and I mean it's just this divide between this ideology and people who are actually looking at the data. And so that's
I want to
yeah,
make
go ahead.
another point here, is that the data doesn't just say one thing. The data indicates trends. And within those trends, there's lots of the opportunity for variation, right? This is not deterministic. It's not like the data says, oh, will happen and it will happen within this time frame. It's and I mean, we keep coming back to that essay I wrote a couple of weeks ago where we said, look, we examined all of the uh, modeling scenarios like OPEC and IEA STEPS that are bullish for oil and gas. Then we compared them to the evidence, and all of them failed. They are not consistent with the evidence and the arc of the evidence, the arc of the trends in that evidence. Now, that doesn't mean things couldn't change. That doesn't mean that there are disruptive events that will maintain the status quo. But that's the whole point. You can have a rational conversation and a disagreement and a debate about these kinds of things. That's not what we have here in Canada. What we have is over and over again, we have this hysterical narrative where, bank CEOs go into the National Post and write impassioned pleas, for Canada to become an energy superpower, which is just a ridiculous idea on the face of it. If you think it through, it sounds good. It's a great narrative phrase, catchphrase. It means nothing. Means absolutely nothing. That's the level at which we are having the national energy conversation. And we need to stop that. And that's what Energy Media is pushing back hard on that. Stop feeding me bullshit. Give me evidence. We can now argue what the evidence means, but we need to start talking about evidence. And I'm getting annoyed about it because I'm seeing what's going on inside the federal government, and it has become it's beginning to look like Alberta, where I'm being told by bureaucrats inside the system they have to keep their heads down because if they don't agree with the official line, you either get sidelined, you get shuffled out the door. But your career it's becoming very much like the Alberta Ministry of Energy, or the Alberta Energy Regulator, or even the industry itself. If you don't agree, you out the door, and that's dangerous. That's when you make very big mistakes that
It's
come back and bite
scary.
you.
It's scary to think that people are being silenced. Those are people that are there to protect the public. They need to be able to speak up without fear. Um, so I mean, I think that Sorry, this has been the biggest meltdown in Energy Media's history here.
This is great. Do you
Um,
remember during the pandemic when that poor fellow was doing, he was like doing a national, I think he was in the UK, and he was doing this TV show, and all of a sudden the door opened, and
the
he was
nanny
doing a
comes
Zoom
in.
call. Yeah, well, first of all, his kids come in, and the nanny's freaking out behind him trying to get the kids, and you and I have had this conversation. Let the kids in. Like,
Yeah.
who cares? They're, hey, Lord, just
Yeah, she's not in any mood for this show today.
yeah,
But
don't worry about it.
anyways,
We're we're kids and family friendly here.
yeah, and I appreciate that very much. Um, and so, I mean, I think that that's all I had today. I just want to remind people if they like our content to please like and share our channel, join us live. I'm so happy to see so many people in the comments this morning. And if you like us doing this show live, minus my toddler's meltdown, please let us know because Mark and I are happy to do more last week's This Morning Live. We think it's a great way to interact with you. And thank you, Ian. She is a cutie. Usually she's such a cute, sweet little girl. She's just having a hard day today. And so like, share, and if you'd like to support Markham and I, join a membership on YouTube and also make sure you follow us on Substack. And
Great.
over
Thank
to
you
you,
very much,
Markham. Do you have,
folks.
okay.
Well,
Thanks, everyone. Oh yeah, last
look,
word. Go for the last word.
sometime in early in the new year, there are folks in Ottawa who are trying to get me to go out and sit on some panels and do some presentations in Ottawa. Could be January, could be March, are the most likely dates. So what I'm hearing so far is that the fix is in. Like all the stuff, the pipelines, the LNG plants, the expansion of the oil sands, the fix is in. The government wants it, Carney wants it, Hodgson wants it. This is where we're going to go. All the other cabinet ministers have been told to get on board or get out. And there is a consensus in Ottawa that they're rallying around that point of view, and there's nobody coming along and saying, "Excuse me, there's another way of looking at this." And I wrote an essay on the weekend. I said Mark Carney is wrong. He just is wrong, and the evidence says that, and there's a very good argument for why. Today, I'm going to publish an essay that says not only is Carney wrong, Poilievre is wrong. They're both wrong. And there is a third way of doing things that still makes use of our vast hydrocarbon resources, but does it in a different way. Does it as materials instead of, and builds out some other things. And so there is a different way to look at this. And by dear God in heaven, we just we get fixated on this one narrative,
Yeah.
and the whole country has to climb on board. And if you're not, you're either silenced or you're sidelined or you're ignored or whatever.
Anti-Canadian.
Anti-Canadian, and those of us who think no, we have to. There's a better way to do things, more value, more security, less risk, and so we're going to promote that as hard as we can because there's nobody else.
Yeah.
And that's a sad state of affairs, man, when an independent news media has to carry the can for a different way of looking at the Canadian energy system and questioning whether the value of investments that from the Prime Minister on down, everybody agrees has to, we are lemmings headed for the cliff. That's our
Yeah.
take. And nobody has persuaded me different so far.
Well, and I think the difference here is we are looking out for our future. I mean, people think, okay, well, we need to build this pipeline to have more money in our economy. Well, folks, what we're talking about is the same thing. It's just a different way, and we are trying to look out for Canada's future, into building something, that's better and more sustainable. So on that note, I just want to say thanks to everyone for joining us this morning. I'm so pleased to see so many comments over the week. I always read all the comments, so keep them coming. And if there's anything that you want us to see us talk about or want us to bring on an expert, also let me know. I'd be happy to do that. And yeah, I think that's it, folks. We'll see you next week.
Sounds good. See you next week.
Okay. Okay.